This is the second video I've made now that focuses on a studio at large and not just a specific game or franchise or topic in gaming or anything like that. And can you guess what the first studio that I talked about in a video was? Insomniac. Yeah, that's the level that we're at right now. It's hard to argue that any other studio is outputting games at the rate that Insomniac is while maintaining the quality that they have. Of the 4 big AAA heavily marketed Sony exclusives that have come out since the launch of the PS5 as of today, Insomniac is responsible for 2 of them. Less than 3 months after their latest game, Sony holds a conference to show off its upcoming titles, and of the 4 upcoming PlayStation Studios games shown at that conference, Insomniac was responsible for 2 of those as well. How is that even possible? How much cocaine is Insomniac doing? I'm a big fan of PlayStation, and I think they've been on a ridiculous hot streak in terms of their games recently, and also a hot streak in terms of their announcements, if you can have that. But it's hard not to say that Insomniac is kind of carrying Sony in that department, because without them, the volume of both of these things drops down significantly. Insomniac is my personal favorite studio right now, not just because they always know how to deliver with a game, not just because they know how to get me excited, not just because I don't ever have to wait very long in order to get my hands on a new game from them, but also because they are the gold standard for a healthy work environment in the AAA gaming space. They deserve every good thing that's happening to them right now, not just because they've been making great and iconic games since day one, but because they're doing so while putting the health and safety of their employees first, all while also not delaying anything. How is this even? I swear to God, this is like some voodoo magic going on over there. Hands down, they're my favorite developer right now, but it is hard to say that they're the best video game developer out there because they're missing one specific thing, and it's very crucial. And in a second here, we're going to talk about how with their upcoming titles, they could achieve that one thing that they're missing. See, they have a much better handle on the holy trinity of quality, variety, and output rate than other devs who you might think of as the best in the world. You know, Naughty Dog, Rockstar, From Software, they can be pretty lacking in these 2 categories specifically. They've all been making very similar types of games from genre to gameplay for a hot minute right now, and especially Naughty Dog and Rockstar have an issue with their rate of releases, so overall Insomniac is a much better balanced studio, I'd say. But these 3 studios do have something that Insomniac doesn't have, which is arguably the most important thing of all: a true gaming masterpiece. And the thing about all of these studios is that depending who you ask, you could pick different games for each studio and it'd be just as valid. Personally, I'd say that the first 3 that come to mind are The Last of Us, Red Dead 2, and Bloodborne, but I think you could make just as compelling a case for Uncharted 2, San Andreas, and Dark Souls 1, among others. Insomniac doesn't have anything that fits that bill to me. I've enjoyed every single Insomniac game I've played. Spyro is a classic franchise, Ratchet and Clank is amazing and has so many great entries, Sunset Overdrive and the Resistance franchise are criminally under-discussed, and those games are amazing, but none of those are really masterpiece level games. I think the closest that Insomniac has gotten to that level is with Spider-Man PS4, and even then, I think most people will say that that game is incredible and one of the better games in recent years, but it also doesn't belong in the same class as God of War, Uncharted 4, Breath of the Wild, or Super Mario Odyssey. It's just slightly below titles like that. With their new announcements though, I do think that they have a chance to make a title of this caliber. Both of these games seem a bit darker and more serious and have a bit more weight to them than a lot of recent stuff that Insomniac has done. So how exactly can these 2 games help Insomniac become the best studio in the world? Unofficially. Does this matter? Let's start with Wolverine. I think Wolverine is still well out. Some people are saying it was gonna release in 2022. In what? If that happens, I will chop my foot off. No, it's definitely coming somewhere around 2024, about a year after Spider-Man. I think that'll give them 4 years since the release of Miles Morales. That seems pretty reasonable. Obviously, the tone of this one is gonna be a lot darker just from that trailer and also a tweet via the creative director of the game. And while I don't think you need a mature tone to make a masterpiece level game, there is usually a correlation of sorts just because you can be more shocking, convey heavier emotions, and put the characters through more harrowing stuff when you apply a darker tone. Insomniac has followed a very similar path to Naughty Dog over their existence with a few deviations. For both studios' major titles, they started off with popular mascot platformers, moved on to companion third-person shooter platformers, and then moved again to third-person action-adventure games with a quippy protagonist, although Insomniac did do a little bit in between as well. Naughty Dog's next output was a much more serious and dark game franchise, still in that third-person action action-adventure scene, and it looks like Insomniac has a chance to do the exact same. So unlike some people, I don't think that Insomniac lacks the writing ability to pull off a more mature game, because the writing on the first Spider-Man game was up to snuff with the earlier Uncharted's, and we know how that studio was able to transition into darker stories. Even Uncharted 4 is like way more mature than the rest of the games. Yes, the team behind this one is not the Spider-Man PS4 team, it's the one that helmed Miles Morales, which was a less well-written game, sure, but I feel like that was a lot more because they were trying to rush things and throw too much information at you at once in a small game. And with a title that'll definitely take longer to develop and be fully fleshed out and not a short experience, I think that they can definitely use the studio talent to write a story that's on the same level as their contemporaries. And there's also just so many opportunities and stories to adapt with this character, and a lot of them can be really emotionally impactful from the very beginning. Spider-Man 1 had to get you to have fun above all else. It was serious at times, but it was very carefully picked times. Other than that, you were pretty happy-go-lucky during that game. Wolverine, though, you can focus that tale in a way that we haven't seen in media, not even in Logan. Because you have so much more time in a game to tell a personal story revolving around this character, and you can tell these stories while he's still Wolverine and not Old Man Logan. From source material to Insom's previous writing endeavors, I think that we can see the case for them to be able to pull off a Last of Us level Wolverine game. Not to draw comparisons prematurely or unfairly, they will be very different, I'm sure, but I mean in terms of focusing your efforts into writing an impactful storyline above all else, and then having that story stand the test of time, and I think Insomniac has the ability to make that game. I didn't even mention that Insomniac actually has more experience with well-written dark stories than Naughty Dog had back in 2013. The Resistance franchise is amazing in my opinion and was never afraid to get more serious. It has some holes in its storytelling, but overall that franchise is a great sign for this game. The last piece of the puzzle is getting great actors, especially for Wolverine. Some people have floated Roger Clark, who was Arthur Morgan in Red Dead 2. Amazingly, I actually met the guy yesterday and I talked to him a bit and went to a Q&A, massive flex. And he actually brought up these two games of his own accord. Nobody asked him about it, and he was talking about how excited he was for them, and he was asked if he would maybe want to play Wolverine, and he did seem really into the idea. He also said that it might be cool to see a Canadian actor play the role, but still, that seems to be a slight possibility, and if that happens, I would be over the moon. My hope is that Insomniac can find a good middle ground for the combat, not quite Soulsy combat, not quite Arkham combat. I really don't think either of those would work here, honestly, especially since you'd have to strip down the Arkham system back to what it was in those early games, and maybe even less because Batman had all those extra gadgets to play around with, and that step back would feel outdated, especially after the recent Spider-Man games. I'm really excited for them to show more. Hopefully we get some new information from them next year, but in terms of what we'll almost definitely get more information on next year, let's talk about Spidey. As exciting as having Venom in this game is, I honestly think the more intriguing villain to me is Kraven the Hunter, who is the voiceover in that first trailer. Not only has Kraven never appeared on screen in any of the Spider-Man movies, which gives Insomniac a great opportunity to adapt him with a lot of creative freedom, but Kraven is also pretty terrifying on occasion. He like buried Spider-Man alive that one time. I'm gonna assume that Kraven is the reason that Peter and Miles end up in a city other than New York for this game. It's not confirmed that they will be in a different city, but I think if NYC was the setting for Spider-Man 2 after being the setting for Spider-Man 1 and Miles Morales, that'd feel really cheap and weird. You don't really retread game maps like that. I highly doubt we see New York past maybe the opening of the game. And back before this announcement, I was wondering how they'd get them both out of the city, since I assumed both Miles and Peter would be in the game, and I was like, I guess they could pull a Miles Morales and a Far From Home and just say that they went on vacation or something, but that seems like a hand-wavy solution. But with Kraven in the mix and apparently shaping up to be quite a sinister adversary, I think he could show his power and hunting ability by literally getting Peter and Miles to flee the city because of him, giving us a new map or maybe multiple small maps if he keeps pushing them to new ones, and really just showing how terrifying this dude is. If Spidey was waltzing around pummeling the Sinister Six last game on his own, and now even with Miles, he's bolting in order to survive. Having a presence like that in this game is what I'm really hoping for, just this looming figure that genuinely terrifies the Spider Boys. I feel like that would be just a much better premise for the game than one had. Venom is also a great addition because it gives the potential for Peter to attach to the symbiote in this game and maybe make you play as evil Spider-Man? Maybe play as Miles trying to defeat Peter for a while? Either way, that's just such a cool and promising idea. And we know that they held off on the black suit costume in 1 because they wanted to bring it in legitimately later, so we gotta think that that's what we're getting here. This also means that Peter's struggle with simultaneously being very close to the villain while also needing to defeat them, which is what made the ending of 1 so good, is now maybe gonna be happening the whole way through. Peter's closeness to his enemies is really important to why these villains are usually so awesome in his stories, and I hope that the game really brings back Harry, makes him normal for a while, lets him hang out with Peter and be more likable than James Franco, and then symbiotes him. I clearly want a long game here because it lets all of these sections actually breathe, and I don't know what exactly Insomniac is going to end up doing, though I do trust them at this point. But to me, I think that these villains that they've set up here are the absolute best that they could have chosen, and they set up in multiple ways a significant amount of emotional turmoil for Peter in this game. I have a feeling that our boy is going to be put through a lot in this game, just pushed to his absolute limits, and I honestly think that this game has just as good of a chance to be Insomniac's masterpiece as Wolverine does. Masterpiece or not, Insomniac does have an opportunity to do something incredibly cool here. Taking previous interviews along with their recent blog post, it seems as though they might be working on their own extended universe of games that'll expand maybe past these two current properties. To me, that seems like an incredibly daunting task. I could see a publisher working on an extended universe, but a single developer? That sounds on the verge of impossible, but if there's any studio that can pull it off, for the reasons that I mentioned earlier, it's gotta be Insomniac. Hell, they might not even need an all-time classic title that everyone points to as one of the best games of the past whenever. If they can pull that universe off, they'll be officially in a different league than anyone else. One thing that I also think that we're forgetting is that Insomniac has at least 3 teams right now. Maybe they kind of merged the teams together into 2 so that they could focus on getting these games out as quickly as possible, but if they didn't, then if Spidey 2 is being helmed by the same people behind Spidey 1 and Brian Intihar is the creative director, and Wolverine is being helmed by the same people as Miles Morales and being creative directed by Brian Horton, then what's the future of the team that just did Ratchet and Clank, which is Marcus Smith as the creative director? Is there a chance that we could maybe see their announcement next year at a Sony showcase? I know that sounds ridiculous considering we already have these 2 announcements, but if it took less than a year for the Miles developers to come up with their next announcement, then who's to say that this team isn't going to do the same thing? It could also be another creative director, of which they clearly have a lot, which they could pair with that 3rd team. They had in the 2016 Ratchet and Clank game, Sean McCabe, Chad Desern, and Brian Algier as its creative directors. How many Brians do you have working there? Do you have a factory that you're using to just pump out these guys? What the hell is going on? I do hope that Insomniac's 3rd studio, or if they somehow have more than at least one of their many studios, will focus on their own IPs. As cool as it is to get Marvel stuff from Insomniac, and they've nailed it so far, I don't want them to just become a Marvel studio because they have so many good ideas on their own. I'm not saying that they're becoming a Marvel studio just based on this Wolverine announcement, I'm just saying that I prefer if they didn't, in case that is the plan. Bring back Resistance, make a Sunset Overdrive 2 if you can, keep making Ratchet games, maybe start up a new franchise. I think at least one team at all times should be working on non-Marvel related stuff just to give us some variety and make sure the studio doesn't become one-dimensional and lose its history. But in terms of Marvel, can I just make a quick plea? Please, make a Daredevil game, for the love of God. Guys, we have the Dual Sense controller now. It's literally designed so that you can feel things in the controller and maybe tell where they're coming from. Please tell me that it's crossed somebody's mind to make you feel where an attack is coming from the controller, and then use the right stick to parry in that direction by flicking it in whatever direction the thing came from. I don't know how exactly you would impair the player's vision during combat without making it seem boring, or I had a few ideas, but they would probably make you sick if you looked at it for too long. But that's also why I'm a dumb kid sitting in a chair talking to like 10 people and not a game developer. Please make a Daredevil game with this technology. I'll love you forever. Anyways, that's me. That's my thoughts on Insomniac and how they could use their upcoming games to really establish themselves as the best studio in the entire industry. What do you guys think? Do you guys agree with me? Do you guys think that Insomniac is already there? I would love to know your guys' thoughts. Leave them in the comments. And I will see you guys next time. Peace.